what a regulatory sandbox is and why it has become so relevant in the context of AI models, specifically in the financial sector.
These are legal instruments that usually regulators put in place to help come through with innovation, to cope with innovation in a more flexible environment. Because what happens when a sandbox is created is that the projects that are eligible and accepted by the regulator to take part in this experiment, they can be tested in real markets. So it's products that are going to be tested with real consumers.
So thank you, everyone, and it's a very interesting, Professor Singh, for that introduction, and it's a very interesting thing that Dr. Parasio has agreed very graciously to be a part of this particular podcast, and I've been looking forward to discussing with her some of the finer points of some research work that we have been doing. It's a part of India UK collaboration, and we had been trying to work in the domain of specifically regulatory sandboxes, as and whether we actually can have legal principles uh, related to such sandboxes, and how exactly that would work in the context of different AI models, more specifically about those models which are deployed in the financial sectors. S- and Isabella has been instrumental in leading this project so far. And but what we have also realized while working on this project is that there is not a lot of awareness among people about the actual function that a regulatory sandbox plays is in the context of AI models, etc. So I'm just wondering if Isabella, would you like to briefly explain what a regulatory sandbox is and why it has become so relevant in the context of AI models, specifically in the financial sector?
Of course. Thank you, Shouvik. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So, to kickstart and answering your question about regulatory sandboxes, these are legal instruments that usually regulators put in place to help come through with innovation, to cope with innovation in a more flexible environment. Because what happens when a sandbox is created is that the projects that are eligible and accepted by the regulator to take part in this experiment, they can be tested in real markets. So it's products that are going to be tested with real consumers, but they are going to have flexible regulatory requirements applied to them. Most of the time, there is a lift on regulatory liabilities and legal requirements that usually players within that market have to abide for. And that's why this is such a popular instrument when we talk about AI, when we talk about innovation, technology development overall. It is an instrument that was first curated or first created in the UK. The Financial Conduct Authority was the first one to enact the regulatory sandboxes around 2015. And since then, it became very popular. It's now foreseen in the UAI Act, and other jurisdictions are also adopting it as a way to test AI products in the market and see how they perform, and then adjust their regulations accordingly.
Yeah, and it's great that you mentioned the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, because from what I have been given to understand, when the FCA had actually come up with their regulatory sandbox, they were not focusing exclusively on AI-based solutions only, but any technology-based solutions. So as the number of AI-based solutions start, and the applications which started at coming in front of the sandbox, as the number kept on increasing, do you think that the approach that FCA or other financial regulators have taken in the UK, there was something somewhat of a change in approach, or was is it still the same way that they have been functioning? Because in India also, the RBI has their own regulatory sandbox, SEBI has their own, Insurance Regulatory Development Authority of India has those. And they were certainly not they had not certainly not created the sandboxes exclusively for AI models. So we really feel that way, that when it comes to AI models, there are some additional concerns, additional issues which these sandboxes should keep in mind. So what about the FCA?
So regarding the FCA, this is a program that it's been going on for quite a long time. And the FCA relies not only in regulatory sandboxes, they have lots of innovative actions. They have a whole innovation hub that the agency operates. And actually, it's interesting because since 2007, actually, so even before the sandbox project started, the FCA, but at the time, the regulator at the time, the Financial Services Authority, that then became the FCA, had already enacted guidance on algorithmic decision making within the financial sectors. So in the UK, the regulators in this space are already looking to algorithm decision making for quite a while now. And their approach, it's an approach that they call that it's technologically neutral, which means that independently of AI or non-AI, whatever comes next or what was there before, it should apply, and it should be flexible enough to protect consumers and to keep the sector working in a way that it's stable and also regards and protects their principles. So they have a principles-based approach mostly. This hasn't changed. Okay, these principles have been there for quite a while now. They have a new principle that showed up a couple of years ago, about 2 to 3 years ago, that is the consumer duty principle. These ones has been generating quite a buzz, because especially regarding AI, because nobody knows exactly how the agency is seeing this principle when it comes to AI. Basically, in very broad terms, and this is a very broad principle, it says that companies that are regulated in the financial sector, in the banking and financial sector, should always have the best interest of their consumers in mind, and they should not harm them in any way, and should pay attention to the way they use vulnerable information about their vulnerable consumers, right? So as not to discriminate anyone. And as you see, this is quite related to AI, because AI has its own risks, own technological risks regarding their decision making, and potential discrimination and potential harm in the way the decision is taken. So this leads to the use of sandboxes in the AI environment. But as I said before, sandboxes are there for quite a while. This is a principles-based approach by the FCA. It's been there for a while, despite the consumer duty. Even the consumer duty was enacted almost simultaneously to the boom in AI. So it might or might not be related to AI itself. It's not clear, but most likely not. It is a new approach. It's a new thing that the agency created. And it is a good thing in a sense that it's quite flexible to encompass new technological development, but at the same time, it requires further guidance of the agency in some aspects, because it can be too broad, so it can be difficult for the regulated market to actually understand how this will be enforced in practice.
Actually, I mean, that's a great point with regard to the principle-based approach that you just mentioned. And because what my understanding has been so far is that regulators across the world, especially in the financial sector, they have often opted for the principle-based approach to somehow accommodate the flexibility that is necessary to accommodate the diversity that can be there in different types of solutions, customizing it for specific people's needs, etc. So, would you like the audience to learn a little bit about the TRISE project that we have been doing, and how that principle-based approach actually necessitated such a project?
Of course, it will be my pleasure to introduce the project. So the TRISE project is actually named a techno-regulatory AI sandbox, from hypothetical regulations to practice and back. And the whole idea behind it is to come up with hypothetical regulatory requirements and test the implementation of those requirements in practice. because as we were discussing here, a principles-based approach is sometimes hard to operationalize in practice. And this happens with ethical frameworks as well, seen in the AI realm a lot these days. So the OECD has ethical principles, UNESCO has ethical recommendations for AI development, and also there are recommendations of the same kind issued by standardization bodies or engineering associations. And there is a gap there between these principles, this ethical guidance, and how the way the technology is developed and deployed. And it's very hard to actually make these principles come live. And it's hard also for regulator to create language that is flexible enough to encompass new technological development, but at the same time be meaningful in a way to make these principles come true. So the idea of TRISE comes from this gap. And a little bit that what we are trying to do is bridge this gap by bringing together legal scholars like Shouvik and I, and technologists that work in the AI field. So we've been working together with professors at IIT Bombay and IIT Madras to develop a model that in our idea, it should be compliant to the hypothetical regulations that we create. So the idea of TRISE come up with these requirements and then test their implementation through developing and creating an algorithm that we believe it's compliant. And we know that coding law, it's an open-ended problem in the field of tech. And it's not that we are trying to find like a golden solution for that, but what our aim is to provide regulators with tips or with guidance on how to enforce their principles in a way that makes sense for technologists, but at the same time achieves the goals that the principles are aiming for.
Yeah, and that, I mean, as I have found to my experience, that can actually open the door for a series of fascinating challenges, as in, because AI systems in finance, even on the best of days, can raise a lot of ethical concerns like algorithmic bias, transparency, explainability. So, how, do you think that the different regulatory sandbox experiments that are taking place all over the world, are these issues who's being directly addressed within these experiments? And should sandboxes mandate these AI specific reporting standards, or would you say it is too early to formalize such obligations?
So that's a great question. It's a question that we are grappling ourselves like within the project all the time, I believe, because we've wrote a few evidence for public consultations here in the UK, and we were faced with those questions because we tried to evaluate what previous sandboxes had done and how they had worked in practice, which types of requirements were flexibilized or were lifted, and what were the actual results for consumers. And as it happens, the information about all of this is still a bit obscure. So there are reports, there are public information about it, but they are not addressing this specific issue that it's crucial when it comes to AI and when it comes to the future development of the technology. So in my view, and based on what we are seeing in the project, transparency is an issue. And it is an issue when we talk about AI systems itself and the way that the AI system is actually made and it's developed and it's deployed. So there are transparency requirements and regulations such as the UAI Act and reporting information. But transparency is also an issue in terms of the regulator itself and how the regulators are actually dealing with AI and how they are implementing all these innovation techniques and all these legal or regulatory experimentations. So then it could be seen as a knife of two sides when we talk about transparency. And in my view, sandboxes are an appropriate environment to be testing all of that, including to test how transparency requirements should be enacted or how legal requirements should be enforced. It's the whole purpose of the sandbox, right? I believe, though, that regulators are still facing difficulty on how to do it in the realm of AI, because AI has all these ethical issues. It is a hot topic within society, which brings attention to the regulators also. And there is a matter of regulatory capacity and asymmetry of information between regulators and the market and the industry that makes it harder sometimes for them to deal with this issue. So, for example, the FCA in the UK, a few months back, has released a public consultation on a project that they are calling AI live testing, which can be seen as a spin-off of a regulatory sandbox. And they are evaluating if they are going to do this or not with AI, allowing products that are ready to go to market to be tested before the actual release. So in this sense, it's quite similar. It is a sandbox, right? From a legal perspective in this sense. But when you read the FCA document about this AI live testing, it becomes clear that they still don't know which direction to take with that, what exactly they are going to do with it, and what they are going to measure or not measure with this project, which means that regulatory capacity is an issue here, and dealing with asymmetry information as well.
Yes, and I think these are questions which currently regulators across the world are trying to come to terms with, of course, to varied degrees of success. In fact, the Reserve Bank of India a few months back had set up this high-powered committee which was supposed to look into guidelines for ethical use of responsible AI in the finance domain. So this responsible AI has now started, that word is now gaining more and more familiarity. And how would you like the definition of responsible AI to be, apart from explainability? What else should be there in AI solution which makes it responsible?
This is another hard question to answer, because responsible AI is a very fluid term, and it can assume different meanings to different people. Does it mean to be responsible within the AI realm? I understand responsible AI as having, let's say, three basic components. An ethical component, that this is directed to developers and deployers in the way that they actually program AI and they developed all those algorithms and to make their decisions. A legal component as well, in my view, because ethics alone is not enough to change behavior of those players, right? We've seen that in previous scenes, regulatory scenes. If you take the internet example, where, well, responsible internet, if you want to call it that way, but like lots of the way that you regulate this space was left to the market players by themselves, and frameworks that can be similar to these ethical principles that we see in AI. And these generated lots of issues because there was a lack of enforcement. So I understand that responsible AI does need regulatory action there. So like a government-led effort to make these principles enforced in practice. And a third component of responsible AI, because so far we talked a lot about development, deployment, but we can also talk about responsible AI in terms of adoption, right? So those who are using the technology also need to use it responsibly, in a way that makes sense to their tasks, what they are trying to achieve. And this means that we need AI literacy from users in general of this technology, including, for example, in our case, the legal profession and the legal professionals. But this goes not only for lawyers, this goes to everyone adopting AI. Then in terms of content of responsible AI, there are the basic principles that are there all the time, and they can be seen in the OECD principles. They are their UNESCO recommendations. They are in the white paper of the UK government, and they are also in discussions in India as well, about transparency, explainability. These two go hand by hand. Accountability, reliability, privacy, fairness, and non-discrimination. These two also go hand by hand. So I think that responsible AI encompasses all of that. And we need the ethics part, but we also need publicly led regulation to make it enforceable. And we also need to look the way we use the technology. So not only how we develop, but also how we use it in our day by day.
Yeah, so that's a lot of things to pack within that particular term, RAI, or responsible AI. And among apart from the ones we factors that you mentioned, I personally also believe that when any team of researchers are actually working on solutions in to come up with responsible AI, or when if it is being reviewed from a regulatory perspective, a diverse approach. I mean, the presence of people voicing different interests, different perspectives within the team can also help the responsible AI to become more, or truly responsible in its formation and not only in its deployment and use. So from that perspective, how would you say that, what has your experience been so far working with not only in an interdisciplinary project involving, engineers and lawyers, and one would, some people will say they are as different as chalk and cheese, but also, this is an example of a cross-border project. So where, people, researchers from UK and researchers from India are collaborating. So what has your experience been so far? As in, can this really lead to the research output being more responsible?
I believe it can. I believe that what we are doing in this way, it's quite innovative. First of all, as you mentioned, is interdisciplinary. And interdisciplinarity, despite being a topic that is discussed within literature, it's discussed within research for quite a while now. So this is not like, oh, this is super innovative. It's the first time that someone talked about interdisciplinarity in the world. That's not true. But the fact is that despite it being a discussed topic, it's not a very, it's not, we don't see it much happening in practice, right? Interdisciplinarity is hard because, well, disciplines exist for a reason, right? People talk, there is, each discipline talks a different language, aims a different type of body of knowledge, and it's important that they exist. And having this specificity is important. But I think when the topic is AI and even other topics that will certainly appear in the future, or might have even appeared in the past, that they mobilize the society as a whole. They mobilize different areas of knowledge and they challenge all areas of research. These are very hard, complex problems to solve, right? Very hard problems, complex ones to solve. And they require that we as researchers get out of our comfort zones and talk to each other. And TRISE is doing that in a way. So my experience is that's very interesting to talk to technologists and have that dialogue happening. We face challenges every day translating our own legal terms to make them more understandable for the technologies, and the same goes for us. Like when we are trying to understand how a data set works, like what exactly are the variables that should be included there or not be included there, like how is this process goes from the side of those who are developing the technology. So all of this dialogue, I think it's very rich. We can learn a lot from it, and it's very necessary. So interdisciplinarity should be seen not only in research like TRISE, but definitely as well in regulatory bodies. So if you can have a regulatory body that has different areas of knowledge to work together to think about regulation, I'm sure that you're going to have a better outcome than if you only have a group of lawyers doing that or only a group of technologists doing that, because they only have one side of the picture, right? About being a cross-border project, this is also part of responsible AI, because we talk a lot about diversity, non-discrimination, and how AI is very context specific. And I think our research also shows that, because we are all the time comparing, but in the UK, this is how it happens. Oh, but in India is different because we have a different institutional scenario. So things there play out differently. So how do we deal with those differences in terms of institutional culture, in terms of regulatory frameworks, legislation frameworks, but also in terms of diversity, plurality of languages, that it's the case of India. So all of these things, they matter when the subject is AI as well, because AI per se it's a crossing border technology, right? It's lots of the time it's made in one place, but deployed and used in different places. So I think our project also makes us think about those things.
Yeah, and I think that this is just a start, right? All of these teams, as we keep on doing our research and proceed, more and more people from different streams should join and offer their valuable initiatives. Because at the end of the day, it's all about organic growth, and it's also about innovation, and that's one of the reasons why we are today having this conversation as part of organized by this institution, which is also all about innovation in the legal education sector, and that's one of the reasons this podcast was made possible. So yeah, I think we are out of time. So thank you, Isabella. Thanks a lot. I mean, I was supposed to call you Dr. Parasio formally, but well, it takes a little bit getting used to. But it was so nice having you, and for you to explain all these basic concepts about regulatory sandboxes, the TRISE project, of course, and also the overall idea of responsible AI that we are trying to advocate and we're trying to facilitate. So thanks a lot for your time, and well, we look forward to hosting you soon sometime in India.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It would be a pleasure.